in the Bainbridge Island School District, it is perfectly fine to talk to students about politics as long as that political discussion does not involve Israeli-Palestinian relations. Let's get to it in our segment, Unbelievable. Boop. Okay, so yesterday, a woman named Emily Elgin, she's the equity curriculum specialist. Of course, that's a job in the Bainbridge Island School District. So Emily sent an email to staff members at the Bainbridge Island School District with some tips on how to discuss, or maybe not discuss, what's happening in Israel, between Israel and Hamas, with students. And I'll start by saying, before I read you the email, I actually agree with the overall message that the equity curriculum specialist relays to teachers and to staff, and the overall message being, hey, this is a complicated situation. We don't need to take sides or try to dive into the whole history of Israeli-Palestinian relations with students, because I tend to believe overall, we talk about this a lot on the show, that it's a slippery slope when teachers get involved in talking about current events and politics with students, particularly young students, because it leaves room for teachers to insert their personal bias in those conversations. And also, I think it's a slippery slope. You know, if we discuss this one issue on current events, do we have to discuss this other issue? And what happens when teachers do go past just the point of just simply educating kids to taking a position or encouraging students to take a position? So let me read this message that went out from, again, the equity curriculum specialist at the Bainbridge Island School District. Dear colleagues, oh gosh, I'm going to read the whole thing because I can't. Of course it would start with this. I would like to begin by acknowledging my gratitude to the Suquamish people on whose land I live and work. Today is Indigenous Peoples Day, a time to honor and celebrate the Indigenous people whose rich cultures and deep resilience have contributed so much to the world in which we live. Personally, I'd like to extend my thanks to my Native colleagues, friends, and neighbors for the thoughtful ways in which they share their land and teachings with me and their patience as I learn. All right, so that's how this email begins. Might foreshadow some of what we're going to discuss. She goes on to say, my heart is heavy, therefore, to be reaching out to you with another purpose, to raise concerns about how students in our community may be processing and responding to this weekend's news from Israel and Gaza. My goal is not to justify or condemn any of the actions taken by Hamas or the State of Israel. As a teacher, my goal is to protect and support the students in our community. Here are some thoughts I'd like to share as we begin our week. She goes on to say, what we can do now is show compassion. We can grieve with both Israelis and Palestinians, acknowledging that this is a human tragedy and it touches upon many of our lives. When it comes to compassion, we need not compete nor take sides. Let us listen with our hearts and without judgment. And I tend to agree with that, although I don't necessarily agree with the sentiment that you can't condemn terrorism and brutal acts of terrorism. That seems a little bit too hands-off for me. She goes on to say, this is not a time to argue about the politics of the Middle East. The conflict there is long-standing and complex. We should all do our best to understand this history, but this is a long process, and I tend to agree that as teachers, especially if you have younger students, trying to get them to understand the complex, lengthy issues between Israel and Palestine in the Middle East is probably not particularly productive. She goes on to say, be on the lookout for anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in the ways our students are discussing these events. And then at the end, she lists some ways where, anti-Israeli sentiment might actually be anti-Semitism. So there's a lot about this email that I actually agree with. Showing compassion, listening to students who might be upset, not taking a side on the issue, not condemning certain actions, although again, I think condemning terrorism should just be universally accepted. And if this were the way that they wanted to approach hot button political issues, I think that I would be okay with that in the Bainbridge Island School District. The issue is, as the staff member who tipped us off to this pointed out, the issue is that the school district has not been consistent on that policy. And in fact, at numerous points in the past, the school district superintendent has actively encouraged teachers and staff members to take sides on hot button issues and to talk about politics and political and social issues with their students. And this particular tipster sent us several emails from the past. This one was from May of 2022. Peter Bang Knutson said, Dear BISD community, As you probably have heard, this past weekend, an 18-year-old white male entered a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, and allegedly opened fire, killing 10 people and injuring 3. News outlets report that the attack is being investigated as a racially motivated hate crime. He goes on to talk about the tragedy, which of course was a horrible, awful tragedy, but he says specifically, to help combat hate, it is crucial to engage in conversations about race and social justice with our students. So actively encouraging what could be very heated political conversations with kids about race and social justice. There were other emails, these about the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer. This first one came, again, from the superintendent a week after George Floyd was killed. And it says, through culturally responsive teaching, honest conversations about race and racism, and promoting institutional practices that eliminate racism, we can collectively take a stand for justice. Now, look, you could argue that it's entirely appropriate for a school district to, quote, take a stand for justice in an act of blatant police brutality. But then why now would it not be appropriate to take a stand for justice against terrorism in regard to what's happening in Israel? So you can see the inconsistency here. The school district superintendent also sent out an email after Derek Chauvin was convicted in the murder of George Floyd. He said, "Dear BISD community, earlier today, the jury delivered a verdict in the Derek Chauvin murder trial, finding him guilty on all 3 counts he faced in the death of George Floyd. Mr. Floyd's murder accentuated the urgency to end institutional racism and oppression in our country." He said, "I encourage you to engage in meaningful discussions with your students and process what is happening in the world around us." So when it came to George Floyd, you wanted teachers to engage in meaningful discussions with their students and process what's happening in the world around them. But fast forward now to what is a major world event. Yes, a hot button issue when it comes to a topic that is so deeply complex, but you actively don't want teachers to help students process what's happening in the world around them when it comes to Israel and Palestine and Hamas. This particular tipster also said, and is working to find the email for us, that the district encouraged school employees to talk about the issue of abortion when Roe v. Wade fell. So again, it's a matter of consistency, and it speaks to really the unbelievable nature of political discussions in our public school system, but also the slippery slope. If you're going to encourage teachers to take an active position on certain political and social issues, to talk to their kids about those issues, and to almost encourage the students to have a particular viewpoint on those issues, how can you, in the same breath, actively disencourage a word? Actively unencourage.
Discourage.
Thank you.
Discourage. Close, though.
Wow. I talk for a living. Actively discourage teachers from taking sides, from taking a position, from talking to their students about something as significant as what's happening in Israel and what's happening with the terror attacks from Hamas. It's very strange to me, and I think that it's important to call out that level of hypocrisy, and also to use it as a reminder that it's just best if we leave heated political conversations and heated political debates outside of a school setting. You know, I'm sure, and we've reached out to them for a comment, and I'm sure their response is going to be, well, you know, race and racism is something that impacts all of our students, and this is a social issue that is much different than something happening, you know, thousands and thousands of miles away. But I am sure that there are students who are Jewish in the Bainbridge Island School District. Heck, I'm sure that there are students who have ties to Palestine in the Bainbridge Island School District. And so, yeah, these are issues that impact them. So you have to decide as a school district, and I think this is the case for most school districts, do you want to get involved in political discussions or not? Do you want teachers to get involved in heated political discussions with students or not? I think common sense would tell us that's probably not a good idea, that they should be focused on their education. Certainly as issues come up, you can talk to teachers about how to handle it delicately. You can tell teachers to refer students to their parents for those conversations so that those kind of discussions can happen at home. But it's really not appropriate, it's really not up to a school district to be picking and choosing what kind of political and social debates can be happening in classrooms.